The silk clung to her hips like memory. Midnight black, slit high enough to tempt a scandal. Elena Rossi moved through the crowd as if she belonged, though she knew damn well she didn't. Not yet. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the ballroom, like inverted cathedrals. Men in velvet tuxedos sipped aged scotch and eyed fortunes. Women swanned in couture that cost more than Elena's student loans. Everyone wore masks literal, for the gala theme, metaphorical, because this was Paris, and power had its own dress code. Elena's mask was black lace, delicately floral, the kind that invited questions but answered none. It shadowed her cheekbones and framed her gaze with mystery. She'd designed it herself. Of course she had. This was a celebration, technically. Word had spread that the new fashion investment firm, Belladonna Holdings, had made its first bold acquisition, an independent American label with bite, attitude, and just enough edge to scare off the safe money. Her label. Elena Rossi Designs. They didn't know it was hanging by a thread just 3 weeks ago. They didn't know the woman whose collection they now toasted was living off protein bars and IOUs in a Brooklyn studio that leaked when it rained. They didn't know her. But one man noticed her. She felt his eyes before she saw him, hot, tracking, deliberate, like he'd decided something before she'd even turned around. She didn't need to look to know where he stood. A darker space between candlelight. A man who didn't mingle. Predators didn't. They chose. Elena sipped champagne she couldn't pronounce and turned, slowly. He was tall. Black tux. No tie. His mask was simple and satin, but somehow more intimate than elaborate ones. It drew your gaze to what wasn't hidden: his mouth. And what a mouth. Cruel, possibly. Beautiful, definitely. His jaw was sharp, his hair just long enough to curl over his collar, and his body carried a silence that made space for him wherever he moved. He didn't smile. Just looked. And then he walked toward her. Elena's pulse skittered, but she held her glass steady. Her dress did the talking, backless, sleeveless, sin incarnate in the right lighting. He stopped a breath too close. Her body reacted before her mind formed words. "Are you always this intense with strangers?" she asked, voice low, playful. But she didn't step back. His gaze moved down her, slow enough to be deliberate. "Only when I want something." American accent. East Coast. Educated, but restrained. She couldn't place it. He held her stare, unflinching. His eyes were a stormy gray cool at first, but layered. They made her want to know things she shouldn't. "I'm not for sale," she said, half laughing. He leaned closer, voice quiet. "I don't buy women, but I've been known to chase them." Something inside her cracked like ice dropped into scotch. She should have walked away, flirted, smiled, gone back to pretending she belonged. Instead, she asked, "What's your name?" "No names tonight." He paused. "Unless you want me to lie." She tilted her head. "You think I'd let a liar touch me?" His smile finally was devastating. "I think you'd let the right man touch you, even if he whispered lies in your ear the whole time." Elena didn't answer. Not with words. She finished her champagne, handed off the flute to a passing waiter without looking, and said, "I need air." He followed her without hesitation. They didn't make it to the garden. It was a hallway off the west wing, dim, unused, echoing with the memory of music from the ballroom. He pressed her against the wall like gravity. She arched into him like flame to oxygen. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was collision, tongue and teeth, and the sound of silk rustling against desire. Her hand slid into his hair. His fingers curled around her waist, possessive, as if he already had the right. God, she should stop this. She should care. She should ask questions, demand context, protect her career, her body, her name. But then he pressed his lips to her throat and whispered, "Tell me no." And she couldn't. They made it to his hotel barely. A suite overlooking the Seine, all shadows and glass and dangerous temptation. He stripped her like he'd done it before. Reverent. Efficient. She returned the favor with teeth-grazing skin. Their bodies spoke in a language older than reason. He was relentless. Skilled. Like a man who liked to dominate but worshipped while doing it. When she said harder, he obeyed. When she said wait, he did. And when she didn't speak, He read her like a map. And God, she wanted to be mapped. Later, naked, breathless, boneless, she lay against his chest. His fingers trailed slow, absent circles along her spine. "This was a mistake," she murmured. "Why?" "I don't sleep with strangers." "You just did." She rolled to her side. "Doesn't mean I'll regret it any less tomorrow." Silence. Then, a softer truth. "I haven't stopped thinking about you since you walked into that room," he said. Elena froze. That was too much. Too soon. Too dangerous. So she did what she always did when the world pushed too close. She slipped out of bed, gathered her dress and mask, and kissed his forehead lightly. "Real life isn't this perfect," she whispered, and left before dawn. The sun climbed slowly over Paris, indifferent to the secrets it revealed. Sebastian Blackwell sat at the edge of the bed, the sheets cooling beside him. Her scent lingered jasmine and champagne, with a whisper of something darker, something like defiance. He hadn't asked her to stay. He never did. But for the first time in years, he'd wanted someone to. He dragged a hand through his hair and exhaled the kind of breath that didn't ease anything. On the bedside table, her mask lay folded, lace curling at the edges. She hadn't taken it with her. It wasn't just a one-night stand. He knew that the moment she walked into the ballroom, every eye in the place shifting like compass needles drawn to her. She didn't fit, not the way these women did. She wore her ambition like armor. Beautiful, but purposeful. She moved like a woman who had learned not to beg for space. She carved it. And her eyes. He'd seen hunger in 1,000 variations. But Elena's wasn't for money. Or even validation. It was for the life she believed she could build, even when no one else did. That kind of woman was rare. And dangerous. Sebastian wasn't used to being the one left behind. He stood, naked and unhurried, stepping to the floor to ceiling windows that framed the gray-blue morning. Paris looked smaller in daylight. Less mysterious. Less seductive. Unlike her, he picked up her mask and turned it in his hands. Delicate seams, hand-stitched beading. Whoever she was, she knew craft. That told him more than she'd said with words. No name. No number. But she'd left a thread. And he always followed threads. 3 days later, Elena stepped off the elevator at the Belladonna Holdings Manhattan office, her heels clicking like intent on marble. Her stomach twisted under the sheath of pale gray wool she'd sewn herself. Simple. Elegant. Understated. The kind of armor she needed today. This was her first official meeting with the investor group that had rescued her label from financial collapse. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like walking into a lion's den where she didn't know who the lion was yet. She adjusted her cuff, squared her shoulders, and entered the boardroom. 8 men. 3 women. All tailored, all bland. Until her gaze hit the chair at the far end of the long glass table, and stopped. Time cracked. Him. He sat with one leg crossed, fingers steepled, suit matte black, like the night he'd taken her apart. His expression unreadable. Controlled. But his eyes, those slate-gray eyes locked on hers like gravity. Her chest tightened. Her knees almost betrayed her. She didn't blink. He didn't flinch. A beat passed. Then another. "Miss Rossi," said the moderator, "a woman in pearls and power brows, meet Sebastian Blackwell, lead partner. He personally approved your acquisition." Lead. Partner. Elena's throat went dry. She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "I believe we've met." Sebastian stood slowly, a calculated move. He offered his hand, businesslike. "Elena," he said, voice perfectly neutral. "Pleasure to finally speak professionally." Professionally. She stared at his hand like it might burn her. Then took it. His palm closed around hers. Firm. No tremor. No smile. Just that heat, again low and intimate and impossible to forget. She pulled her hand back with deliberate calm. Sat down. Didn't look at him again. But God, she felt him. Every shift in his seat. Every pause before he spoke. It was like being haunted by a touch. The meeting dragged projections, budgets, marketing partnerships. Elena answered when needed, deflected where she had to. and fought to keep her expression neutral. All the while, Sebastian observed. When it ended, she didn't wait. She stood, collected her tablet, and walked to the door. "Elena," he said behind her. She paused. "Stay a moment." Her jaw clenched. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes sharp. "We don't know each other, remember?" A flicker in his gaze. "I remember every moment." She turned fully. "And you said no names. No truths. So why the hell are you here?" He nodded to the assistant, still gathering files at the corner. "Give us the room." The door clicked shut. He stepped closer, hands still in his pockets. Calm. Collected. Calculating. "I didn't know you were Elena Rossi that night," he said quietly. "Not until after." "Bullshit. I'd seen your name in the pitch deck," he continued, unbothered by her bite. "But you were one of 50 submissions. I hadn't reviewed the finalists. And yet," she snapped, "you're suddenly the lead investor for my label. What, because I was good in bed?" His expression sharpened, finally cracking. "Don't reduce what happened between us to that." "Oh, I'm reducing it. Because if I don't, I might start believing it was real." Silence. The air was thick power and pain and possibility all crammed into a too-clean room. Then he said, "I liked your work. Before I knew it was yours. That's why Belladonna funded the brand." "Sure. But," he added, stepping closer, "after Paris, I made damn sure I'd be part of this deal." There it was. The confession. Her chest tightened. "So you're here to play puppeteer? Control the poor little designer who spread her legs?" His jaw ticked. "No. I'm here because I wanted a reason to see you again." Elena swallowed rage and something worse, the thrill of wanting him anyway. "You don't get to want me in business and in bed," she said. "Pick one." His eyes never left hers. "What if I don't?" The words coiled between them like silk and sin. She turned, hand on the door. "This isn't Paris anymore, Blackwell," she said coldly. "And I don't sleep with men who can bankrupt me." Then she was gone. He watched the door for a long time after. She didn't slam it, but she may as well have. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Money. New York had a way of swallowing you whole. Its buildings rose like challenges, windows reflecting dreams back in distorted shapes. Elena stood outside the towering headquarters of Belladonna Holdings, the concrete beneath her stilettos just slightly slick from an early fall drizzle. It felt like she was drowning in steel and glass. She gripped the paper cup of espresso tighter. The bitterness matched the taste in her mouth since the meeting 2 days ago, since he stood at the head of that table like he hadn't watched her fall apart under his hands, since he shook her hand like they were strangers. Sebastian Blackwell. Investor. Liar. Lover. She hated that her body still remembered the sound of his breath when he came undone. Elena closed her eyes for a second too long, then forced herself to focus. Today wasn't about him. It was about salvaging her brand. She stepped inside. Upstairs, the mood was sharp-edged and falsely polite. The kind of tension that hummed beneath designer suits and multi-million-dollar decisions. The assistant at the front desk gave Elena a strained smile. "Miss Rossi, Mr. Blackwell asked me to take you directly to his private office." Of course he did. Elena kept her face blank, but her pulse quickened. She followed in silence, heels muffled against plush carpeting. The door to Sebastian's office opened without a knock. He was waiting, standing, back to the skyline, suit perfect. The air between them snapped, taut the moment the door closed. "Elena." He said her name like it was a word meant to be owned. She didn't sit. "This better be about my line, not last weekend." His mouth curved. "Barely. It's about both. We need to talk." She crossed her arms, tension coiling beneath her skin. "There's nothing left to say." "You lied." "I didn't lie," he replied. "I didn't tell you who I was. There's a difference." "Oh, how noble." He stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "If I'd told you I was the lead investor, would you have left the gala with me?" "No." "Exactly." She blinked. "So manipulating me was strategic?" "No." His voice dipped. It was desperate. That halted her. For a split second, She saw something fracture in his carefully guarded expression. Not weakness, but truth. Real and bare and bleeding at the edges. Then it was gone, buried beneath that impenetrable mask he wore better than any silk. Desperate, she echoed, wary. He didn't answer. Just motioned toward the table behind him, documents spread out, sketches, sales data, mood boards. Her work. I called you here because your campaign is being redirected, he said. The board wants a safer direction for the launch. Millionaire'S? I built that line on risk, on edge, on real women who wear power like a second skin, and now they want beige. They want safe. They want sellable. And you, she pointed at him, furious now, have the power to overrule them. His voice stayed maddeningly calm. Not alone. I own 51%. Not 100 dopply. She scoffed. How convenient. He walked to the table and picked up one of her sketches, the one of the plunging velvet gown with a chained back and slashed sleeves. This, he said, is what made me invest. Her breath caught. He looked at it like a man studying scripture. He continued, softer. It reminded me of you. A little dangerous. Bold. Unapologetic. Flattery won't fix this. I'm not flattering you. I'm telling you I believe in the vision. But I'm not the only one making decisions now. That's why I need you to stay in this. Fight them. Design something that wins, even when the stakes are rigged. She stared at him, anger still radiating from her pores, but something in her chest stirred an ache she didn't want to name. You think I can win them over by playing nice? No, he said. I think you win by being exactly who you are. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. Still, she folded her arms tighter. You're good at this. He raised an eyebrow. At what? At making people think you're on their side. His voice dropped. I am on your side. Elena's stomach twisted. She looked away, unwilling to let him see how close his words landed. I'm not your project, Sebastian, she said. I know. I'm not your mistake to fix. I never thought you were a mistake. Silence expanded between them again. She finally exhaled and moved to the table, flipping through the sketches, half to hide her expression. I'll redesign the 3 looks they're complaining about, but I'm keeping the line's DNA. If they don't like it, they can walk. He nodded once. Deal. She turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. Next time, she said without looking back, tell the truth. From the start. Then she walked out, heels steady, back straight, heart racing. In the quiet that followed, Sebastian remained still. His hand drifted to the sketch again, the one that reminded him of how she'd looked that night in Paris. Backless, fierce, unforgettable. He'd made 1,000 ruthless decisions in boardrooms just like this one, but none had ever shaken him the way she did. Elena stepped into the elevator with the kind of composure that felt stitched onto her skin. As the doors closed, her shoulders dropped just slightly, the armor softening, not breaking never in public but cracking at the edges. Her reflection stared back in the mirrored walls. Perfect lips, narrowed eyes, jaw clenched just enough to betray the fight she was losing inside. Sebastian Blackwell was everything she feared in a man. Powerful, obsessive, controlled. But worse than all of that, he saw her. Not just the brand, not the rising designer on the edge of fame, her. And the way he said her name, like it was already his. She hated it. She craved it. Ground floor, she said to no one. The elevator obeyed. At least something did. That night, her studio smelled like fabric, glue, and desperation. Bolts of tulle, leather scraps, and delicate chain fringe were strewn across every surface. A vintage sewing machine hummed in the background like a heartbeat. She hadn't eaten. She didn't care. Redesign 3 looks. Maintain the DNA. Appease the investors. Elena had built her aesthetic on unapologetic femininity, not soft, not flowy, but jagged-edged elegance. Clothes that spoke before you did. Dresses that defied the room to ignore them. She wasn't about to water herself down, not even for a man whose lips she still felt on her skin. She leaned over her sketchpad, pencil biting into the page. Her fingers moved before her thoughts did. As if her body remembered something her mind refused to admit. The silhouette she sketched was new, tighter at the waist, exaggerated shoulders, but the back was bare. Violently so, like surrender disguised as strength. She stared at it for a long time. Then, almost bitterly, she whispered, "Damn you, Blackwell." Across town, Sebastian stood on the rooftop of a building he owned and never lived in. Below him, Manhattan glittered like a million lies told beautifully. He hated it here. Always had. Too loud. Too fast. Too much pretending. But Elena was here, and she made the city feel honest again. His brother's voice rang in his head, from some whiskey-drenched night years ago. "One day, you'll meet a woman who scares you. That's how you'll know she's worth it." He hadn't believed it then. He believed it now. Sebastian took a sip of scotch and reviewed the text message still unsent on his phone. "I'm sorry about Paris. I should have told you. I didn't want it to be real either." He deleted it. Too weak. Too late. Instead, he opened the folder he always kept encrypted, the one marked Rossi Holdings, pre-acquisition. Inside, everything Belladonna had compiled. Background checks, debt reports, market analysis, and one surveillance photo from the Paris gala. Elena standing alone, half-turned, looking into the crowd, caught mid-smile. She looked invincible, but he knew the look behind the smile. The calculation, the hunger, the fear of being almost. It was the same expression he'd worn at 30, when he'd taken over the Blackwell legacy and turned it into something sharper. He hadn't bought her label for control. He'd bought it because she reminded him of everything he'd killed in himself. The next morning, Elena arrived at the Belladonna Design Annex with 2 garment bags and a USB drive. The junior assistant, a woman in impossibly high pumps, and a blazer, 2 sizes too tight, nearly dropped her coffee. "Miss Rossi, they weren't expecting you until noon." Elena handed her the drive. "Tell the board to look at this first. The revisions are finished. If they don't like them, they're welcome to sew something themselves." And with that, she disappeared into the elevator like smoke. Inside the boardroom later that afternoon, the mood was less contentious. Quiet, even. Sebastian watched Elena's revised designs flick across the screen. Gasps. Nods. Even a slow clap from one of the more difficult partners. She'd done it. Maintained the edge. Increased the marketability. Seduced them without compromise. When the presentation ended, murmurs of approval rippled across the room. The head of operations leaned over to Sebastian. "You were right about her." He said nothing, just kept his eyes on the screen. The final design hovered there, a backless blazer dress with mirrored seams and a structured velvet bodice. It was Elena in fabric form, daring, unbending, and painfully, beautifully hers. That evening, she received the email. Subject line: "Feedback from the Belladonna board, revisions approved." One line followed. From Sebastian Blackwell: "You didn't just win. You owned the room. I'll be where we met in Paris Friday, 9 p.m. Come if you want the truth." No name. No signature. But the meaning was unmistakable. Elena stared at the message, her finger hovering over the delete key. Her heart thundered in her ears. She didn't know what scared her more, that she wanted to go, or that she already knew she would. Chapter 3. Silk and Steel. The Parisian hotel bar hadn't changed. Still dim. Still decadent. Still too quiet for casual affairs and too elegant for cheap ones. Elena walked in like she owned it. Her heels struck marble with purpose. Her dress black again, of course whispered with every step. This time, the silk was heavier. Structured. It had weight. Like she did now. She didn't hesitate. She knew exactly where he would be. The back corner. Leather booth. Half lit by a single gold sconce. He was waiting, drink in hand. A shadow in a bespoke suit. Sebastian looked up when she approached slowly, like he'd known she'd come, but didn't dare assume it. His eyes roamed her, slow and electric. "You came," he said, low and deliberate. "I said I wanted the truth," Elena replied. "You said I'd find it here." He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Then let's be honest. She sat, crossing her legs with feline grace. Good. Let's start with why. He didn't ask why, what. He knew. Sebastian folded his hands. I bought into your label because it was the smartest investment on my desk. But I pushed it through because I couldn't stop thinking about you. Elena didn't blink. Business and obsession don't mix. Blackwell. His mouth twitched. Neither do art and boardrooms. But here we are. She leaned forward, voice laced with challenge. You seduced me, then became my boss. That's not obsession. That's power. He met her gaze without flinching. If I wanted power over you, Elena, I'd never have told you the truth. But you didn't tell me the truth, she snapped. You let me walk into that boardroom blind. I gave you Paris. Her breath caught just briefly. She hated that he could say that and mean it. Like that night was a gift he'd handed her, not something they had burned into existence together. I didn't ask for Paris, she said quietly. I asked for a chance. And I gave it to you, he said. You think those investors would have touched a debt-saddled American label without me vouching for it? I don't need saving. I didn't save you, Sebastian said. I bet on you. That stopped her. Because part of her, the part that remembered scraping rent money together and sewing through bloodied fingertips, knew how few people had ever said those words to her, let alone meant them. Still, she couldn't let him off the hook that easily. She tilted her head, softening her voice but not her stance. So now what? You just, what? Stay on the board and play white knight whenever I piss off the suits. I stay on the board, he said, because I'm the only one in that room who understands what your designs really are. She narrowed her eyes. Which is? Armor, he said. You dress women like warriors. Your silhouettes say, come closer and bleed. Something unspoken curled in her chest at that. He saw it. He always saw it. And what do you wear? She asked, more quietly now. What's your armor made of? He leaned back, swirling his drink. Contracts. Silence. Reputation. Sounds lonely. It is. Their eyes locked again. Too long this time. Too intimate. She felt the shift before either of them moved. A magnetism. Slow and inevitable. Like the moment before lightning strikes. Sebastian broke the tension first, not with touch, but with a question. Do you want me to walk away from this deal? He asked. From your company? The words hit like ice water. Elena swallowed, because part of her wanted to say yes, to reclaim every ounce of autonomy, to burn the bridge and watch him disappear into memory. But another part deeper, truer knew what that would mean. The label would survive, yes, but her designs would become neutered, tamed, safe. And she would lose the only man who'd ever understood the jaggedness she stitched into every seam. I want... She started, then stopped, looked away. He waited, patient, still. Finally, she said, I want you to stop pulling strings behind my back. If you believe in the brand, let me run it. Let me lead. Sebastian nodded. Slowly. Done. Her eyes flicked to his. Just like that? I'm not here to hold your hand, Elena, he said. I'm here because you make me feel like my empire finally means something. She blinked. He didn't soften. He didn't reach for her. He just let the words hang there raw and heavy and far too honest for a man like him. After a long silence, Elena stood. I have a show to prepare for, she said, and an empire of my own to build. He stood too. Good. I'll be watching. I know, she said, turning toward the door. But just as she reached it, she paused, glanced over her shoulder. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you. Sebastian's eyes burned into hers. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Elena, he said. I'm asking for time. Back in her hotel room, Elena kicked off her heels and sat on the windowsill, looking down at the city of masks and masquerades. He was dangerous. He wasn't done with her. And she wasn't done with him either. Not even close. The next morning, Elena sat alone at her work table, swathed in sunlight and chaos. Sketches covered every inch of the table, some half erased, others boldly inked, all pulsing with her need to reclaim control. Fabric swatches clung to her fingers. Threads curled at her wrist like veins. But it wasn't design she was wrestling with. It was him. Sebastian Blackwell. The investor who saw through her like smoke. The man who made lust feel like a language she never meant to learn. The night before lingered like perfume, not overwhelming, but present. Every word he said echoed in her head, dangerously sincere. I'm here because you make me feel like my empire finally means something. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not without strings. She stared down at a sketch, a sleek pantsuit with an exposed spine. The kind of piece that made men uncomfortable and women powerful. And yet, in that moment, Elena didn't feel powerful. She felt unsteady. Pulled between desire and self-preservation, she threw the pencil down. A knock echoed through the studio. She frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her team didn't arrive for another hour. She opened the door cautiously. And there he was. Sebastian. In the daylight. Still in black. Still devastating. But this version of him was stripped of theatrics. No boardroom armor. No mask of composure. His jaw looked a little tight. His collar slightly askew. He hadn't shaved. She hated how human that made him look. He held something in his hand. I brought coffee, he said. She stared. You brought coffee. He held it out. Double espresso. No milk. 2 sugars. Elena hesitated. Did you call my assistant for that? He smiled faintly. I remembered from Paris. Of course he did. She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. Brief contact. Electric. He didn't ask to come in. He stepped in anyway. Because that was Sebastian. Permission was optional when conviction felt inevitable. Elena folded her arms. This isn't your office. Then fire me. She arched an eyebrow. Tempting. His gaze wandered to her sketches, his voice softer now. You've been working. Trying to. It's hard to focus when your funding sleeps with you. The words hung in the air sharp, intentional. Sebastian's expression didn't shift. I deserved that. You deserve more than that. But I have deadlines. I'm not here to distract you, he said. I'm here to make you an offer. Elena laughed. Dry. God. Of course. A Blackwell never shows up without a proposition. This one's different, he said. I'm giving up veto power over your creative decisions. Her mouth parted slightly. What? I've already drawn up the addendum. You'll have full control over the direction of the brand. Creative freedom. No interference. Just final budget approval. Legally. She blinked. Why would you do that? Because I meant what I said. I bet on you. Not a safer version of you. His eyes didn't flinch. And because I know you'll make it unforgettable. She felt the emotion before she could name it, a tightness in her chest, painful and tender. Vulnerability disguised as business. He was giving her the one thing she'd fought for her entire life. Autonomy. Trust. No conditions, she asked. He stepped closer. One, he said. Of course. There was always one. You don't shut me out. Her throat tightened. Sebastian. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, he said, voice low. I'm asking for your presence. I want to know you beyond this tension we wear like armor. She looked away, afraid of what he'd see in her eyes. This isn't some office romance, she warned. This isn't sex in boardrooms. I don't go halfway. Neither do I. Their eyes met. He was close now. Too close. She could smell cedar and something darker. Could feel the warmth of his body through her shirt. The room felt small. Her pulse thundered in her ears. I'm scared of what this is, she confessed, quiet and raw. I know. His hand reached for hers, slow, open, unthreatening. She didn't pull away. You terrify me too, he said. Then he kissed her. It wasn't like Paris. There, it had been wildfire heat, hunger, recklessness. Here, it was something else entirely. Slower. Deep. Devastating. It wasn't just want. It was wanting to stay. Her hands slid into his hair, and for a moment, they stood in the center of her chaos, thread and fabric, and the smell of ambition kissing like they'd been doing it for lifetimes. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered against his lips, "I'm still going to drive you insane." He smiled, low and wicked. "I'm counting on it." Later, after he left, Elena returned to her desk. She picked up her pencil. Her hand didn't shake this time. She began a new sketch, not for the runway, not for the board, just for herself. And for the first time in months, the line on the page felt like freedom. Chapter 4. Threads Unraveling. Elena had always believed in the art of control. In measured glances, in precise stitches, in wearing ambition like perfume invisible, but potent. But that morning, control felt like smoke in her hands. The kiss still clung to her mouth like heat. The smell of him still ghosted her sheets, though he hadn't stayed the night. She hadn't invited him to, because she couldn't decide if she wanted him closer or gone. And that, more than anything, scared her. She needed air. Not Central Park jogger air. Not espresso on the balcony air. Real air. By late afternoon, Elena stood on the edge of a small garden behind a weathered Brooklyn brownstone, the house where she was raised, the house that smelled like dried rosemary and unsaid words. The gate creaked the way it always had, like it was clearing its throat. Inside, the living room was still frozen in time. A pile of Italian fashion magazines beside the couch. A sewing machine tucked into the corner like a secret. Elena knelt beside it. Her fingers drifted across its metal curves with reverence. Scratched. Heavy. Industrial. It was her mother's. Her teacher. Her ghost. She remembered the way her mother's hands moved across patterns like they were maps. The way she'd say real women don't wear trends. They wear intentions. Elena had built her career chasing that one truth. And yet here she was sketching gowns under the gaze of men in suits who'd never picked up a needle in their lives. What would her mother say? "You're afraid of becoming the thing you fought against." Elena pushed the thought away. She sat at the machine and threaded it, instinct taking over. Her feet pressed down. The wheel turned. The hum was music. Not background noise, but memory. Her mind drifted as she sewed not to Sebastian, not entirely, but to the woman she was becoming in his orbit. A version of herself she didn't quite recognize yet. One who could lead in stilettos and still come undone in someone's hands. Could she be both? Did she want to be? That night, Sebastian stood alone in the gallery space Belladonna had just leased for Elena's upcoming preview. It was raw. Concrete floors, exposed brick, moody lighting. Perfect. He walked the room slowly, hands behind his back, imagining her designs suspended in stillness, a choreography of fabric and desire. Her work had an energy he hadn't seen in years. Like it didn't just want to be worn, it wanted to conquer. He'd built empires on instinct, but this was something more dangerous. This was faith. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're early." He turned. Elena stood in the doorway. A loose navy wrap dress, no makeup, her hair in a high knot. She looked more powerful in that moment than she ever had on a stage. He straightened. I wanted to see it without the distractions. Before the press, before the projections, she walked toward him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You always walk spaces like you own them?" He smiled faintly. "Only when I care about what's coming." She arched a brow. "And what's coming, exactly?" "Revolution," he said. "You, unleashed." Elena paused. It was the kind of line that would sound like seduction from another man. But not from him. From him, it was belief, pure and terrifying. She moved past him, letting her fingers drag along the brick wall. "I went to my mother's house today." That surprised him. "First time in a while?" She nodded, slowly. "It reminded me of who I was before this. Before you. Before the funding. Before Paris." He stepped closer. "You think I changed you? I think you accelerated something I wasn't ready for." Silence stretched between them, intimate, almost bruising. "You don't owe me anything, Elena," Sebastian said, his voice rougher now. "Not gratitude, not softness. I just need you to know. I see you." Her eyes lifted. "I see your rage," he continued. "Your brilliance. Your fear. I see the part of you that wants to burn it all down if you can't do it your way." Her breath caught. Because he did see her. Not the way photographers did. Not the way journalists spun her image. But really. And still he didn't try to fix her. She turned her back to him, not out of dismissal, but defense. "I can't promise I'll make this easy," she said. He stepped behind her, not touching, but near enough to feel. "I don't want easy," he murmured. "I want you." The room held its breath. Sebastian stood inches from her, his presence undeniable, not forceful, but certain. Like he wasn't just waiting to be invited in, but patiently proving he could be. Elena didn't turn around. She couldn't, because if she did, she might fall into him. Instead, she looked ahead to the blank space on the gallery wall where her centerpiece garment would hang. A statement piece, one meant to silence a room. "What if I fail?" she said quietly. It wasn't the kind of question she asked anyone. Not her team. Not herself. Not out loud. But Sebastian didn't flinch. His answer came without hesitation. "Then you rise from it." Louder. She let out a slow breath. "You make it sound easy." "No," he said. "I make it sound inevitable." When she finally turned, her eyes met his, and there was no bravado left between them. Just two people who had learned to weaponize their ambition, and now were learning how to put it down in front of each other. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, a small, rectangular box. Black leather. No logo. She frowned. "What is that?" "A gift." "For what?" He stepped forward and opened it. Inside was a brooch antique. Gold, shaped like a pair of scissors with the blades gently crossed. At the center, a single ruby. "My mother wore this," he said, voice lower now. She wasn't a designer, but she was the only one in the family who ever made anything with her hands. "She taught me that beauty isn't in luxury, it's in legacy." Elena stared at the pin. It wasn't just beautiful. It was symbolic. Personal. "Heirloom?" she asked softly. He nodded once. "She gave it to me before I left London. Told me to give it to someone who built more than she destroyed." Elena's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I deserve that yet," she said. Sebastian closed the box and placed it gently on the table beside her. "You will. No pressure. No demand. Just belief. The kind that didn't come wrapped in expectations." She didn't speak for a long time. Just listened to the silence between them, calm, steady, unlike anything else in her world. Then, with a soft sigh, she said, "Walk with me." They wandered through the empty gallery, footsteps echoing. The space was raw and on its stripped floors. Exposed beams. Glass like wet ink. "This place feels like possibility," Elena murmured. Sebastian glanced sideways. "It is." She touched a beam, tracing the imperfections in the wood. "I like that it's not finished." "Most beautiful things aren't," he said. Her lips curved. "You sound like someone who's been broken a few times." He smiled, but there was no amusement in it. "I've rebuilt myself more than I've grown." She looked at him now fully, quietly. "What broke you, Sebastian?" It wasn't a question meant to wound. It was curiosity laced with empathy. He paused, then answered with more honesty than she expected. "My father," he said, "and every deal I made afterward to prove I wasn't him." Elena blinked. She didn't press, didn't need to. Instead, she whispered, "You know what broke me?" He looked at her, waiting. "Being brilliant and being poor at the same time," she said, "knowing I could design circles around anyone in the room and still watching the doors close." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His fingers brushed her hand, and this time, she didn't flinch. This time, she laced hers through his. The intimacy wasn't in the kiss. Not tonight. It was in the stillness. The decision to share silence without needing to fill it. Later, Sebastian left with no promises and no demands, and Elena stood alone in the gallery, staring at the brooch on the table. She picked it up, turned it over in her fingers, and fastened it to her lapel. It felt heavy. And right. Elsewhere, that night, a headline flashed across a marketing monitor in Belladonna's media room. Whispers from within. Belladonna's newest designer is sleeping with her investor. Attached. A blurry photo. Two silhouettes. A man and a woman. Clothes. Intimate. Walking through an empty gallery space. From behind. But enough. Enough to stir questions. Enough to start a storm. And just enough to put Elena Rossi's name and career on the edge of a blade. Chapter 5. The Lie Beneath the Label. The image had gone viral by dawn. A grainy photo taken through the wide glass of the gallery's street-level windows, Elena and Sebastian, caught in profile, walking close, too close. There was no kiss, no touch, just nearness, just intimacy. But in a city like New York, in a world like fashion that was enough to raise suspicion, and suspicion was enough to start a fire, Elena Rossi, designer or designer's mistress. Is Belladonna Holdings playing favorites? The headlines came in slow drips at first fashion blogs and industry gossip accounts, then spread to business columns and marketing newsletters. PR vultures circling for blood. By the time Elena walked into her studio at 9:04 a.m., the news had already reached her team. Her lead fabric cutter, Dom, looked up from his laptop with wide eyes. "You've seen it, right?" Elena nodded, lips pressed into a flat line. "I've seen it." The rest of the team didn't make eye contact, but she could feel it, their glances, their unease, all of them wondering the same thing. Is it true? Was she just another woman who'd climbed the ladder by sleeping with the man who built it? She didn't answer their looks, didn't owe them that. Instead, she walked into her office, shut the door, and opened her laptop. There were 6 emails from Belladonna's communications department, already waiting. One flagged urgent. A draft response. A bullet list of deflection strategies. They wanted her to say it was deeply inappropriate to speculate on the personal lives of professionals, that she and Sebastian were committed to maintaining a transparent and ethical working relationship. Elena scoffed. Ethical? She'd barely wrapped her head around what they were even doing yet. There had been no definition, no agreement, just confessions in dark rooms and kisses laced with contradictions. Her phone buzzed. Sebastian Blackwell calling. She stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then it buzzed again. This time, a message. "S. I need to see you. Now." She replied with a single word. "E. Come." He arrived in less than 15 minutes. His jaw was tense, his eyes sharp, not panicked, but tightly leashed. He closed the door behind him without asking. His cologne followed, dark and earthy and too familiar. Elena stood behind her desk, arms folded, back straight. "You should have told me this might happen," she said. Sebastian didn't blink. It shouldn't have happened. The gallery was empty. It was a private moment. "Nothing in my life is private anymore, thanks to you." His mouth tightened. "I didn't leak anything. We have internal security protocols." That failed. Silence. Then he took a breath. "I'll handle it. Like you handled buying my company without telling me." Her voice cut through the air like steel. "Sebastian Stille? What are you talking about?" he asked, carefully. Her hand reached for her phone. With a few swipes, she pulled up an email forwarded from a former PR contact who still owed her favors. She read aloud. "Sources indicate Sebastian Blackwell initiated the acquisition of Rossi Designs weeks before the Belladonna board was notified. Documents filed under an alias LLC were later consolidated into the fund just before final approval." She tossed the phone on the desk like it burned. "Did you chase my company just to get close to me?" Sebastian's eyes darkened, not with guilt, but with something harder to name. "Elena, answer the question." He looked at her long, level, stripped of polish. "Yes," he said. She blinked. "Once," as if slapped. "I saw your pitch. I saw your sketches. And I knew if I let it go through the normal channels, someone else would snatch it first. So you manipulated the entire process. I protected your work from people who would have sanitized it. You controlled it. I believed in it," he snapped, louder than he meant. "I believed in you. And I wasn't going to let your vision die because a committee didn't know how to see it." Her mouth trembled before she steadied it. "You saw me as a risk," she whispered. "No," he said. "I saw you as the only sure thing in the entire portfolio." "That's not love," she said. "That's acquisition." His expression shattered not visibly, but beneath the surface. A flinch in his silence. "Elena," he said again, this time quieter. But the word cracked under its own weight. She stepped around the desk, every inch of her body screaming restraint. "I let you in," she said. "Not just to my business. To me. I never wanted to hurt you. But you planned for me." Her eyes were glass now. Not broken, not yet, but strained. And then she said the words that finally silenced him. "Did you fall for me because of who I am, or because of what you could build with me?" Sebastian didn't answer. And in that silence, she turned away. Outside, the rain began to fall. Hard. Steady. Cleansing. Elena stood at the window, watching the city blur into streaks of silver and shadow. Behind her, the door closed softly. He was gone. And for the first time since Paris, she let herself cry. Not because she was heartbroken, but because she was done being built into someone else's dream. Elena didn't leave the window for a long time. The rain painted the city in shades of grief, smeared lights, warped reflections, the kind of melancholy that clung to your bones. But she didn't feel fragile anymore. She felt like a wire pulled tight. One frayed spark away from fire. Sebastian had done what men like him always did. He bought control and called it protection. He called it love. But the worst part wasn't the lie. It was the part of her that had almost believed him. The part that had softened, yielded, trusted. She wouldn't make that mistake again. She called an emergency team meeting that afternoon. No agenda. No explanation. Just her voice calm, direct, cold as cut glass on the group thread. Studio in 30. Non negotiable. By the time the full team gathered in the design space, murmurs buzzed like static in the air. They were seated awkwardly between work tables, mood boards, half-assembled mannequins. No one spoke. Elena walked in like a storm in heels. No makeup. Dark turtleneck. Hair in a blunt bun. No jewelry, except the antique scissors brooch on her collar. Symbolic. Intentional. "Let's get something clear," she said, voice like velvet over stone. "I don't answer to the internet. I don't answer to the press. And I don't answer to the insecurities of anonymous sources with Twitter handles and burner emails." A beat. Dome's eyebrows rose. The others sat straighter. "But I do answer to the people who bleed for this brand. To the ones who stitch late into the night and fight for design over comfort. To the ones who believed in this vision before it had a price tag." She let that settle. There is no scandal. There is no corruption. There is no sleeping my way to the top fairy tale to sell to the tabloids. There is only the work, and the work doesn't lie. The room was silent. Reverent. Then Elena stepped forward, unrolling a fresh campaign board onto the wall behind her. On it were sketches, her sketches new ones. Sharper. Bolder. Each one drawn over the last 72 hours. She pointed to the center image. "This is the new anchor dress. Black. Mesh-cut corset. Knife pleats like a spinal cord. We're leading with it. No negotiation." A young assistant named Carla, normally mute in meetings, raised a hesitant hand. "Is it true that Belladonna's pulling funding?" Elena turned slowly. Her voice didn't waver. "If they are," she said, "then I'll find someone else. Or I'll fund it myself. Even if I have to sell my car and max my cards and sew the whole damn line by hand." That was the woman they remembered. The one who had risen from a queen's basement with fabric scraps and impossible dreams. The room began to breathe again. Carla smiled first. Then Dom. Then the others. And just like that, her studio had her back. Not because she defended her reputation, but because she owned her name. That night, Elena sat at her desk, long after the others left. Her coffee had gone cold. Her feet ached. Her inbox was a war zone of PR damage control and belladonna legalese, but she didn't flinch. She was reviewing the sketch of the backless blazer dress, the one that had first made the boardroom lean forward, the one that Sebastian said reminded him of her. She picked up her red pencil and drew a line down the back seam, then slashed it again. And again. She wasn't editing it. She was evolving it. Because now she knew. She didn't need to be seen to be powerful. She just had to refuse to be erased. Across the city, Sebastian stared at the ceiling of his penthouse. He hadn't poured a drink, hadn't called anyone, hadn't moved, because for the first time in his career, in his carefully calibrated, ruthlessly executed life, he couldn't fix something by throwing money at it. Elena hadn't wanted the empire. She'd wanted to build her own, and he had undermined that, even if it was wrapped in intention. He scrolled through his messages, ignored half a dozen press requests, flagged an internal email chain from Belladonna, and paused on a text from an unfamiliar number. You can't protect a woman like her by keeping her in a gilded cage. She builds her own damn castle with fire and pins. There was no signature, but he knew who sent it. Dom. Her cutter. Sebastian closed his phone, exhaled, and for the first time, wondered what it would cost him to let go. Chapter 6. Burn the brand. The email hit Elena's inbox at 6:12, Elena's inbox at 6:12 Elena's. M. No subject. No greeting. No signature. Just one line. Check, Vogue business. Page 2. You'll want to get ahead of this. Her stomach turned. She clicked the link with the numb calm of someone who knew exactly what they were about to see, and still hoped they were wrong. The headline sliced through her like a knife. The dark side of Elena Rossi, model collapse, internal toxicity, and sexual power plays. Below it, a photo from her recent runway rehearsal. A young model 19, maybe fainting on stage. Elena remembered the moment, how they'd paused the show, how the girl had been back on her feet within minutes. She hadn't thought it would matter. Apparently, it mattered now. According to the article, the model had been pressured to fit into samples too small for her natural body and encouraged to skip meals before fittings. Anonymous sources claimed a culture of intimidation on Elena's team. Even worse, one source implied that Elena used her proximity to Belladonna's lead investor to secure her rise and to silence complaints. Elena read the words twice, then once more, slower, not because she didn't understand them, but because she couldn't believe how quickly power could be twisted into poison. She dropped her phone onto the table and pressed her palms to her temples. This wasn't fashion politics. This was character assassination. By 9:00 a.m., her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her lawyer, her agent, 3 fashion journalists she didn't even like. A message from Dom. I'm with you. Just say the word. But the worst was the voicemail she hadn't listened to yet. From Sebastian. She hadn't seen him in days, not since the truth unraveled, and she'd told him to leave. But of course he'd know. He always knew. She didn't press play. Not yet. Instead, she dressed. High-neck black blouse. Wide-leg charcoal trousers. No jewelry. No lipstick. Power clothes. Funeral clothes. Armor. Belladonna's midtown office felt colder than usual. The receptionist barely made eye contact. The air in the boardroom was already stale with tension. Elena walked in without waiting for anyone to stand. Every seat was filled lawyers, PR heads, 2 board members she hadn't even met before. And at the head of the table, Sebastian. He stood when she entered. Elena, he began. Don't, she said, holding up one hand. Don't play calm right now. Not when you've known about this article since yesterday. He blinked. I saw a draft last night, but... You saw it and said nothing? Her voice cracked, not with fragility, but rage. I was trying to control the leak. No. You were trying to control me. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. One of the lawyers cleared her throat. We need to discuss the official response strategy. Let me guess, Elena said sharply. Discredit the model. Pretend I've never even met Sebastian outside of board meetings. Call in a diversity hire to prove we're not a toxic work environment. No one responded. Because she was right. They weren't here to help her. They were here to salvage her. Sebastian stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on hers. Elena, he said, quieter now. There's another option. She crossed her arms. I'm listening. I take responsibility for the collapse, he said. Publicly. Say I demanded thinner silhouettes for branding reasons. Say the model was following my directives, not yours. Her jaw dropped. You want to lie? I want to protect you. Her voice went razor thin. With a lie that ends your career? It's already halfway gone, he said. This brand, your name, it means more than what's in my portfolio. The room was too quiet. No one dared interrupt. Because they could all feel it now. This wasn't just about press strategy. This was about devotion. Real. Raw. Unchecked. And Elena hated that even now, some part of her wanted to say yes. To let him shield her. To accept the rescue. But she'd spent her entire life making sure no one could say she didn't earn her success. She wouldn't let her name be washed clean by someone else's sacrifice. No, she said softly. You don't take this fall for me. Elena, I need you to trust that I'll survive this. That I'll own it. I made the team. I made the culture. I made the pressure even if I didn't say the words. And if I don't admit that, I'm no better than the men we all swore we'd never become. For once, Sebastian had no words. Just pride. And heartbreak. She looked around the room, put out a statement. We acknowledge what happened. We apologize to the model. I'll personally reach out. Then I'll announce a complete rework of the next campaign starting with sample sizing, team diversity, and support protocols. The room shifted. Whispers. Scribbled notes. Nods. But she was already walking out. Not because she was done. Because she was just getting started. Elena stepped out of Belladonna's glass tower into a wall of flashing lights. Cameras. Reporters. Shouted questions slicing through the air like thrown knives. Miss Rossi, do you deny a romantic relationship with Sebastian Blackwell? Was the model forced to continue working despite health risks? Is your success built on personal favors? The temptation to flinch was strong, but she didn't. She walked past them like smoke through a battlefield. Her posture? Unshakable. Her heels? Unapologetically loud. Her silence? Louder. Across the street, a black car idled. Tinted. Familiar. She ignored it. She was done being watched from the shadows. By the time she returned to her studio, the team had seen the statement. A few were crying. Others stunned. One intern fresh out of design school, jaw tight with disbelief, looked her in the eye and said, "Thank you." Elena nodded once. She didn't smile. She couldn't. Not yet. Inside her office, the quiet felt like pressure. She sat behind her desk and pulled up the feed of social media comments. There was rage, of course. Outrage. Mockery. Assumptions. But in between the vitriol, there were threads of something else. Support. From models. From designers. From assistants who'd worked in the shadows. Women who'd seen and survived the same unspoken demands. Finally, someone's not pretending. Rossi's taking the hit, and she's not hiding behind PR jargon. If she rebuilds, I'll buy everything she touches. Elena stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Then she got to work. By nightfall, the gallery was dark and empty. But she had the key. Elena walked in alone. She needed to see the space again, not as a battlefield, not as a scandal backdrop, but as hers. The raw wood beams, the smell of fresh paint, the ghost of her sketches on the walls. It wasn't ruined. Not yet. She stood in the center, right where she'd been photographed with Sebastian, the scandal's ground zero, and waited, because she knew he'd come. Sebastian arrived just after 9. No driver. No guards. Just him, in a rain-damp coat and tired eyes. They stood across from each other in the dark. She spoke first. I told the truth. I know. They might cancel the show. They won't. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unspoken. Then Elena exhaled. I didn't want you to fall with me, she said. He stepped closer. And I didn't want you to stand alone. She looked at him then. Fully. Not as the investor, not as the man who broke her rules, but as the one who tried and failed to protect her the only way he knew how. I don't know if I trust you, she admitted. That's fair. I don't know if I want you in this anymore. I'll walk away, he said, if that's what you need. His voice didn't tremble. but something in it frayed like a man preparing to lose what he never thought he'd find. Elena moved toward him slowly, not because she wanted to soften, but because she needed to see if he'd hold his ground. He did. She stopped inches from him, searching his eyes. "You bought my company to get close to me." "Yes." "You held power over me." "I did." "And yet," she said, voice softer now, "you're still standing here, willing to lose it all." "I already have," he said. And with that, something cracked open between them, not forgiveness, but recognition. Of two people who'd built empires to feel safe, only to realize what they really wanted was to be seen without armor. She touched his chest, not gently, not tenderly, but with the weight of everything she'd carried. "Then stay," she said. He closed his eyes briefly, like that single word gave him breath again. "I'm not walking behind you," he said. "Not this time." "No," she whispered. "You'll walk with me." That night, they didn't touch in the way they had before. No tearing fabric, no slammed walls, no desperate heat. They sat on the gallery floor with their backs to the wall, legs stretched, hands barely brushing. They talked. About power. About art. About their mothers. About the parts of themselves they'd hidden for too long. And when she finally leaned her head on his shoulder, it felt like the most intimate thing they'd ever done. Because it wasn't lust. It was trust fractured, but real. Elsewhere, headlines continued to spiral. Sebastian Blackwell refuses to comment on brand collapse. Belladonna faces calls for investigation over designer misconduct. Rossi declines legal counsel. I'll speak for myself. But within those fires, something else began to burn brighter. A rumor. Elena Rossi's new show is still happening, and it's going to burn the runway to the ground. Chapter 7. Blackwell's Choice. The boardroom was quieter than usual. No espresso orders. No phones buzzing. No whispered side deals or veiled sarcasm. Just tension, the clean, surgical kind. Elena sat at the far end of the polished glass table, her reflection staring up at her like a ghost. Beside her, a belladonna attorney thumbed nervously through a thick legal folder. Across from her, the full board. Executives, shareholders, advisors. And at the head, Sebastian Blackwell. He wore charcoal today. Not black. Not armor. His shirt was open at the collar. No tie. His signature watch was gone. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man stripped down to purpose. "Let the record show," one of the lawyers began. "This emergency meeting has been called in light of public allegations made against Elena Rossi Designs, following the Vogue business article published." "Skip the reading," Sebastian said, flatly. "Everyone here knows why we're in this room." There was a pause. No one dared challenge him. Not yet. Then he turned to the board. Calm. Cold. Controlled. "Effective immediately," he said. "I'm divesting my controlling interest in Elena Rossi Designs." Elena's head snapped toward him. "What?" Sebastian didn't look at her. Not yet. Instead, he passed a signed packet down the table. The belladonna lawyer blinked. This transfers your entire shareholding to the public trust established this morning in Elena Rossi's name," Sebastian said. "She'll control it. She'll run it. No more investor oversight. No strings. No boardroom puppeteering." Gasps. Pens dropped. Someone muttered "Jesus Christ" under their breath. Elena felt as if the air had been yanked out of the room. Out of her. "Sebastian," she said again, lower this time. "What are you doing?" Now he looked at her, and she saw it. The pain. The pride. The absolution. "I made you a promise in that gallery," he said, "that I wouldn't walk behind you." "You're not," she whispered. "You're walking away." "No." His voice was steady. "I'm taking my hands off the wheel, so no one can ever say you didn't build it yourself." Her chest cracked. "You built it with me." He held her gaze. "And now it's yours." A board member spoke up, blustering. "Sebastian, this is madness. You're throwing away a 7-figure stake." 8. He corrected. Casually. "And I'm not throwing it away. I'm investing it where it matters. But the optics, are mine to own, he said. Put the press in a room with me. I'll say it myself. Say what? Elena demanded. He turned back to her, softer now. That I blurred boundaries. That I let personal feelings compromise the chain of command. That I made decisions I believed were protective, but that ultimately cost you your autonomy. Even if it's not true. He didn't blink. It's true enough for them. She stared at him, furious, aching, speechless. And yet, part of her understood, because in a world that twisted power into poison, this was the only antidote left. He wasn't saving her. He was setting her free. An hour later, the press release went out. Blackwell steps down from Rossi Brand, amid ethics scandal. I crossed a line. Not with force, not with ill intent, but with proximity. And in a world that holds women to standards it excuses in men, that alone is enough to erode trust. So I'm removing myself not from support, but from control. Because Elena Rossi is not a product of power. She is a power unto herself. Sebastian Blackwell. By sunset, the headlines flipped. From scandal to sacrifice. From whisper to spectacle. He was no longer just the billionaire in her bed. He was the man who stepped down so she could stand up. Elena stood in her office, watching the coverage roll in, unsure whether she wanted to cry or scream. She hadn't asked for this. Not the gift. Not the gesture. And certainly not the guilt that bloomed in her chest like wildfire. But the most dangerous thing of all, she wanted to see him. Not to yell. Not to undo it. Just to say something that didn't sound like goodbye. That night, she walked to the building she swore she'd never enter again. Sebastian's penthouse tower on the Upper East Side. She rode the elevator in silence, one hand clenched around her phone, the other curled around her keys like a weapon. The doors opened, and there he was. In the foyer, waiting. He said nothing. Neither did she. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then, quietly, she said, I didn't need you to fall on your sword for me. He nodded. I know. I needed you to fight with me. I did, he said, until the moment I realized my presence was the bullet they were aiming at your heart. Silence again. Not cold. Just. Full. Then, slowly, he added, You built a brand with knives in the seams. Elena, but no one warned you that sometimes the blade cuts both ways. She looked at him. Truly looked. And for the first time, she didn't see Sebastian Blackwell, billionaire investor. She saw the man who would burn his kingdom to keep her name intact. And suddenly, that was more terrifying than any betrayal. Because it meant he loved her. And she wasn't ready for what that meant. The next morning, Elena stood alone in the mirror. Not in her apartment. Not in the studio. Not on a runway. She was in the fitting room of her own unfinished showroom, dressed in a prototype gown that draped across her collarbones like midnight smoke. One shoulder bare. The back razor cut, daring. And down the spine, a single blood-red stitch running from neck to tailbone. It wasn't ready. Neither was she. And yet, both would face the world anyway. She fastened the pin Sebastian's mother's brooch just above her heart. It didn't feel like a gift anymore. It felt like a vow. Outside, the world spun on. The coverage of Sebastian's resignation had taken a predictable turn. From predator to protector, Blackwell's PR redemption or sincere surrender. But none of that mattered now. The press would talk. The board would regroup. The vultures would circle. And Elena Rossi? She would work. She would design a collection that wasn't just defiant, it would declare war. Not just on the system that tried to bury her, but on the self-doubt that almost led it. She didn't text him. Didn't call. Didn't ask what he was doing now that he had no seat at the table. Because that wasn't the kind of woman she wanted to be anymore. She had learned how to love someone without losing herself. But she wasn't sure he had. By late afternoon, the first signs of blowback had arrived. Her team was working in tight silence. A stylist dropped out of the upcoming show. One boutique revoked their pre-order contract. An influencer canceled a partnership with a single-sentence email. Too much risk right now. Sorry. Elena stared at that last message, then deleted it, and opened a new file titled, Show order. Resurrection. She didn't cry. She designed. Meanwhile, Sebastian sat alone in a meeting he had once controlled. Only this time, the room wasn't Belladonna's. It was the boardroom of Blackwell Global Holdings, the umbrella under which nearly every Sebastian asset was held. Today, he was the subject of the vote. "Sebastian," his general counsel said, with a voice like iron smoothed over with velvet, "you've stepped away from 3 of your controlling interests in the last fiscal quarter. You've defied internal risk protocols. And now this," she tapped the screen behind her, where his resignation letter to Belladonna was projected like a crime scene, "has placed a media spotlight on all of our ventures." "I understand," he said. "And you're still not retracting the statement?" "No." The council exhaled slowly. "Then the board will proceed." A vote was taken. And just like that, Sebastian Blackwell was removed as CEO of his own empire. He accepted it without blinking. Because while the world thought he'd done it for love, they were only half right. He did it for Elena. And she was something far more dangerous than love. She was purpose. 3 days passed. The whispers died. The show, however, lived. Elena's team pushed forward. They built, sketched, cried, and bled. Fabric was recut. Looks reordered. Her creative lead had the flu. Her marketing lead quit. Still, she didn't ask for help. She didn't even check to see if Sebastian had followed up. Until the day the invitation arrived. Handwritten. Ivory cardstock. No logo. Just 5 words. "If you'll have me there." Yes. No return address. No signature needed. Just a question. The first he'd ever asked without already having the answer. Elena stared at the note that night, alone in her dark apartment. He'd given her freedom. He'd given up his power. And now, he was giving her a choice. To let him be part of the woman she was becoming, not the girl he once tried to shape. Her heart ached, but it didn't break. She placed the invitation on her desk and wrote 1 word on the bottom in red ink. Yes. Chapter 8. Rebuild. The dress didn't come to her in a dream. It came in the dead hours, 3:42 a.m. Eyes dry, fingertips trembling. Sketch paper spread across her floor like a battlefield. The outline formed slowly. A high neckline, but sheer sleeves. Structured corset beneath silk. The skirt long, heavy, dramatic, slashed with deep red underlayers that whispered with movement, like blood just under the surface. This wasn't just a showpiece. This was a warning. A resurrection. She wrote 1 word beneath it, in tight, slanted pencil. Finale. 4 weeks until the show. 4 weeks to reclaim her name. Elena poured herself into the work, not as a distraction but as defiance. Her phone lived on silent. Her inbox overflowed. Belladonna's interim board sent a neutral message of non-interference, but the silence from the industry spoke louder. She was radioactive. And somehow, freer than she'd ever been. Every day she arrived before her team. Every night she left after them. She sketched until her fingers cramped, sewed until her vision blurred, revised fittings with a precision that terrified her assistants. This was no longer about proving herself. This was about becoming herself. Dom watched her from across the studio. "Boss," he said one afternoon, quietly, "you're scaring the interns." "I'm scaring myself," she replied, without looking up. He grinned. "Then it's going to be brilliant." She smiled for the first time in days. Week 3, something shifted. The fashion world, as fickle as it was, fast began to talk again. First in whispers, then in louder questions. Was Elena Rossi really out? Would she show? What was the collection called? No one knew, because she hadn't told anyone. She hadn't even named the show. She just kept designing. One night, her assistant Carla brought her soup and found her asleep at her desk, curled over a swath of velvet and unfinished beadwork. Pinned to the wall above her was a single word, written in red chalk. Ashes. Carla left the soup untouched. She didn't want to wake the storm. 2 weeks before the show, the gallery was ready. The space had been reimagined. Gone were the traditional rows and raised runways. Instead, A single illuminated path snaking through the open gallery like a scar across stone. Elena didn't want distance between the audience and the designs. She wanted them close. She wanted them uncomfortable. She wanted them to feel. She walked the path herself at midnight, barefoot, trailing fabric like smoke. She imagined the crowd, the cameras, the press who had written her off, the investors who had turned their backs. She imagined Sebastian. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself miss him. Not the man who bought her company. Not the one who walked away. Instead, a single illuminated path, snaking through the open gallery like a scar across stone. That night, she did something unexpected. She opened a blank email, typed his name, and wrote, "The finale piece is yours, but you don't get to see it until the show. E." She didn't wait for a reply. 2 days later, a box arrived at the studio. No card, no logo, just a small, carefully wrapped parcel tied in black silk ribbon. Inside, a piece of charred wood lacquered, sealed, carved into the shape of a phoenix. Tiny, delicate, weighted. There were no words. But the meaning was clear. He still believed in her fire. 3 days before the show, the lights failed during rehearsal. Not just flickered, failed. The entire lighting rig shut down mid-walkthrough, leaving models frozen in darkness and her team stumbling across unfinished flooring. Carla tripped over a monitor cable. Dom svore. The producer looked ready to cry. Elena stood at the edge of the runway path, arms crossed over her chest, silent, too calm. Because beneath that stillness was a scream. "Generator backup," she said flatly. "Now." The producer scrambled. Carla whispered, "Could it be sabotage?" Elena didn't answer. She was already checking her phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number. A voicemail. She played it. "Miss Rossi, you don't know me, but I know what you're trying to do. I'd hate to see the fire go out before it lights the stage." The voice was filtered, digitally masked. Male. Threatening. Elena didn't flinch. She forwarded it to her lawyer, flagged it for belladonna security, and then deleted it from her phone. Then she turned to the team. "We're not canceling," she said. Dom raised an eyebrow. "Did someone suggest we were?" "Someone will," she said. "And when they do, you tell them I said this." "No logo." The echo cracked like thunder. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Silence. Then Dom grinned. "Hell yeah." The next day, the PR team begged her to issue a pre-show statement, to soften her image, to acknowledge the journey. She picked up a discarded cable from the floor, held it like a whip, and slammed it down against the concrete. Elena read the draft. 3 pages of apologies, metaphors, and subtle rewrites of history. She returned it with a single note scrawled in red ink. "This is not my redemption arc. This is my resurrection." They didn't argue after that. The night before the show, the studio was empty. Silent. She stayed late, as usual. Not working. Just walking. Breathing. Trying to let her skin remember what stillness felt like. She passed each look in the collection slowly. One by one, each gown hung like a story. A scar. A refusal. She stopped at the finale piece. It was even more violent than the sketch. The fabric was black silk, overlaid with hand-beaded ash-gray thread in a pattern resembling burned lace. The back dipped so low it dared the body to flinch. The skirt was constructed from layered, translucent silk organza, each layer torn, scorched at the edges, stitched back together with visible seams. On the inside hem, in small, crimson embroidery, she had stitched 4 words. "What survives is stronger." Her hand brushed the fabric. This one wasn't for critics. Not for Belladonna. Not for the press. It was for her. And, if she admitted it, it was for him. That night, she stood on her rooftop in silence, the New York skyline sparking around her like broken glass. She hadn't heard from Sebastian since the box arrived. No calls, no texts. But he'd show up. She knew it. He had to. Because this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about witnessing, about letting someone see you rise, and choosing not to run from their gaze. The morning of the show, Elena arrived at the gallery 2 hours before sunrise. She stood in the center of the space barefoot, spine straight, arms open, letting the emptiness see her before the crowd filled it. The floor was polished. The lights were perfect. And her name was written across the wall in stark serif. Ashes, by Elena Rossi. She closed her eyes. And for the first time since Paris, she exhaled without fear. Chapter 9. The Runway Redemption. The gallery was unrecognizable. No curtains. No raised catwalk. No elevated stage separating model from audience. Just a single narrow pathway of polished concrete that wound through the open floor like a scar, intentional and raw. Lights hung low, warm and gold, casting silhouettes instead of glamour. Music hummed low, orchestral strings with a heartbeat beneath them, tribal, defiant. It wasn't a show. It was a reckoning. Elena stood backstage, hands clasped behind her back, dressed in all black, not to blend in, but to command from shadow. She had said no to pre-show interviews. No to selfies. No to seating charts filled with influencers and industry gatekeepers. This night was hers. Every garment, every stitch, every risk. No apologies. No compromises. No Sebastian. Not yet. The crowd filed in slowly, stylists, journalists, celebrities with sharp jawlines and even sharper opinions. A few whispered her name like it was a spell. Others didn't speak at all, just waited. But Sebastian? Sebastian arrived last. No entourage, no security, no logo et suit, just a matte black tux, open collar, and a gaze that searched the room until it found the place he belonged. Front row, center path, dead middle. He sat down slowly, like taking a seat in a courtroom, because he knew what was about to happen, and he wanted to feel every second of it. The lights dropped. The crowd fell silent, and the first model stepped onto the path, her face bare, her eyes dark, her gown, a jagged masterpiece of crushed velvet and exposed boning. The dress moved like smoke and struck like a blade. Whispers rippled. Then another look, and another, each design more unapologetic than the last. Not pretty, powerful, not dainty, devastating. The models didn't float. They walked like warriors. And Elena? She watched from backstage with her heart clenched in a fist. Not with fear, but with release. This wasn't just her comeback. It was her coronation. At the midpoint of the show, the lights dimmed further. The music paused. And from the silence came a single violin, slow, mournful, raw. A funeral dirge for the girl she used to be. Then the spotlight returned not to a model, but to her. Elena stepped onto the runway path. The crowd gasped. She was wearing the finale dress. No one expected that. Not even Sebastian. The gown was otherworldly up close. Black silk layered over sheer ash tulle, laced with torn crimson threads like blood vessels. Her back was bare. Her spine, a living sculpture of seams and intention. Her hair was coiled in braids like a crown of flame. Her feet were bare. Her walk slow, silent, unchallenged. She walked the full path. The audience didn't move, didn't blink. Some held their breath. And when she reached the end of the runway, she stopped. Right in front of him, Sebastian looked up at her. Everything between them, the scandal, the silence, the sacrifice burned in the space of that gaze. She didn't speak. She just raised her hand and pulled a small object from her bodice. The phoenix pin, his mother's. She held it out. The audience, frozen. Sebastian stood slowly and reached up not to take it, but to fasten it to her dress, right over her heart. The gesture was reverent, quiet, and louder than any declaration. Still, she wasn't finished. She leaned down, took the microphone waiting discreetly at the podium behind her, and spoke into the silence. They said I rose from scandal, but I didn't rise. I burned, and I built this with the ashes. A beat of silence. Then, she turned toward him, her voice steady, clear. And to the man who let me go so I could return on my own terms, She stepped toward him. Sebastian Blackwell. The crowd held their breath. She reached into her bodice again and pulled out something small, a gold ring. Simple and luminous. And held it out. The audience exploded. Flashbulbs. Screams. Gasps. She smiled the smallest, fiercest smile and whispered into the mic, "I say yes." The moment hung like a breath before the storm. Elena stood in the center of the runway, the word ashes glowing behind her in red gold lights, holding a ring out to the man who had once risked everything to step aside. Sebastian didn't move at first, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to remember this. Every detail, every pulse, every burn. Her hand didn't waver. Neither did her gaze. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, raw. Elena didn't blink. "You gave me freedom. I'm choosing you with it." His throat tightened. And then slowly, with reverence, he took the ring from her fingers and slid it onto his own. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Not because he said yes, but because he didn't make it about owning her. He made it about joining her. And Elena, she laughed. Not politely. Not delicately. A real laugh. Wild, breathless, alive. It echoed through the gallery like music. The press didn't know how to write it. They tried. Runway revolution ends in surprise proposal. Rossi turns the industry on its head and says yes to power on her terms. Elena Rossi proposes. Blackwell accepts. Love isn't dead, it just wears better clothes. But no headline captured what really happened. Because this wasn't just romance. It was a reclamation. Backstage, Elena collapsed into a velvet chair, dress pooled around her like smoke. Her team buzzed around her, crying, hugging, someone pouring champagne into plastic cups. Dom appeared at her side, tears in his eyes and glitter on his face. "You really did it." She nodded, breathless, heart still pounding. "Are we canceled yet?" she asked. Dom grinned. "Sweetheart, they'd sell their left kidney to wear you now." Sebastian waited by the back door, not in a spotlight, not in a press line. Just him. Jacket off. Sleeves rolled. Ring on his finger. She walked to him barefoot, crown of braids slightly loosened, mascara smudged like war paint. "You're mine now," she said. "I always was." She kissed him. No cameras. No crowd. No show. Just the woman who'd risen from the fire, and the man who didn't try to tame it. Later, as the city buzzed with post-show buzz and the press tried to unravel what had happened, the two of them sat on the rooftop of her studio, a bottle of champagne between them, and silence wrapped around them like silk. Elena stared at the skyline. Then at him. "You didn't kneel," she said. Sebastian tilted his head. "Would you have said yes if I did?" "No." "Exactly." She turned, leaned into his shoulder, and whispered. "It wasn't a proposal." He frowned. "Wasn't it?" "It was a promise." She took his hand and traced the ring on his finger. "No more secrets." He nodded. "No more saving me." He smiled. "I know better now. And if I ever burn it all down again, I'll bring marshmallows," he said. She laughed, and this time, so did he. They sat in silence again, until she whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." And he replied, "Neither am I." Chapter 10. After midnight. The wedding wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't even in New York. It was in Italy. On the cliffs above Amalfi. At golden hour. The ceremony lasted 8 minutes. There were 12 guests. No photographers. No live stream. The dress? Hand-stitched. Off-shoulder. Champagne silk, with threads of black embroidered along the hem like smoke rising from the ground. Elena had sewn it herself. She'd finished the final stitch the night before, barefoot on the tiled floor of her grandmother's villa. Alone. Quiet. Steady. She didn't need to be walked down an aisle. She met Sebastian at the edge of the cliff, sun on her back, wind in her hair, ring already in her hand. "I don't promise to be easy," she told him. "Good," he said, eyes full. "I wouldn't survive easy." The vows were short, but they burned. He didn't ask to kiss her. She didn't wait for permission. They kissed like the ceremony was an afterthought. Like the decision had already been made long before Paris, long before the scandal, long before the fire. After the wedding, they danced barefoot under lemon trees, surrounded by people who didn't care about Forbes lists or fashion columns. Just laughter, grilled fish, soft music, and the scent of basil. Elena sipped red wine and leaned her head on Sebastian's shoulder. She didn't talk about the brand that night, or the 3 new licensing offers, or the press still clamoring for an official statement on her engagement. She just breathed. For once, she let herself exist after the moment, not always ahead of it. Back in New York, the world hadn't forgotten her. Ashes was named Show of the Year by 3 major publications. Her final gown appeared on the cover of Vogue Italia, photographed in chiaroscuro tones like a Caravaggio painting. And Elena Rossi? She didn't open her next show in Bryant Park. She opened it on a rooftop in Harlem. Free admission, no front row, no champagne, just street-level greatness and women who'd never seen themselves on a runway. When asked why, she said, "If you're going to change the world, you have to stop designing for the people already in the room." She turned down an acquisition offer from a French conglomerate worth $38 million. Her investors called it short-sighted. Sebastian called it hot. She hung up the phone, turned to him, and said, "Do you ever miss being in control?" He looked at her tousled, barefoot, coffee in one hand, and said, "I never was." She raised an eyebrow. He stepped forward, kissed her collarbone, and whispered, "You were." Sometimes they argued about team hiring, about interview requests, about whether she should accept a collaboration with a tech giant he used to own. But their fights weren't about power anymore. They were about protection. They both wanted to preserve what they'd built each other. And they knew now how to fight without destruction. One night, she found him sketching at her desk. A building. Sleek, modular, bold. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up. "The foundation. For your next label." She blinked. "I already have a label." He smiled. "This one's for the ones after you." She stared. He handed her the sketch. Rising un Profit Design Incubator, by Elena Rossi. Funded by Sebastian Blackwell. A space for underrepresented creatives, women, queer designers, immigrants, those who didn't come from legacy or wealth, those who couldn't afford to fail and start again. Elena didn't say anything at first, just held the page. Then, softly, she said, "You're still giving me kingdoms." Sebastian stood, walked toward her, placed his hand at the small of her back. "No," he said. "I'm helping you build the ones only you know how to rule." The night was velvet, soft, infinite, wrapped around the rooftop like a secret. Elena stood at the edge of it, overlooking the city she once thought might devour her. The skyline blinked like memory, sharp, silver, merciless. She didn't fear it anymore. Behind her, the new studio buzzed quietly, the last of the interns finishing up before the rising launch party the next morning. Dom was already 3 glasses of Prosecco deep. Carla had burst into tears an hour ago after seeing her own design featured on a magazine blog. Elena let them celebrate. She had her own moment to claim. Barefoot on the gravel, dressed in silk pajama pants and a sleeveless tee. Air loose. No mask. No armor. Just Elena. Sebastian walked up behind her, wrapping a light jacket around her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm still deciding. About how to end something that never really ends." He smiled gently. "This isn't an ending." "No," she said, "but it's a moment. I can feel it." He nodded. Waited. And then, as the breeze picked up, she said it. "Tomorrow, they'll photograph me. Again. They'll ask about Ashes, about Rising, about what's next." He slipped his fingers between hers. "And what will you say?" She turned to him, eyes clearer than the night sky. "I'll say I'm finally walking in my own name." At midnight, the rooftop cleared. Elena returned to the gallery floor alone, heels in hand. The space was empty now, no models, no gowns. Just quiet. Just her. She walked the runway path one more time, this time not as the designer, or the spectacle, or the story they'd twisted, but as the woman who'd survived it all and wrote her own ending. At the end of the path, Sebastian waited. No crowd this time. No cameras. Just the two of them. In the city they once conquered to find each other. She reached him, barefoot and certain. "You waited," she said. "I always would." She placed her hands on his chest, felt his heartbeat. Felt hers respond. "You know," she whispered, "I never wanted forever." He brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. "Neither did I. But this," she said, "this feels like something I'd wear for the rest of my life." He smiled. Not the wicked smile, not the power broker smirk, the real one, and he pulled her into his arms, gently, like silk drawn tight. They didn't kiss like a finale. They kissed like an opening act. Final lines. They had met in shadow, burned through scandal, rebuilt from ruin. And when the lights faded, when the show was done, love was what remained.